Bible.
This conference will now
God
be
made us
recorded.
out of dirt. So we're discussing how God literally forms us and shapes us and molds us, starting from a piece of dirt. And so our first task was to make a vessel. We made a vessel, we had a little bit of clay, and we constructed a vessel. And what the brief was is that we had to put a little bit of who we are into our creation. It had to be a vessel, it had to hold something, but it had to have a little bit of our character or something that represents us. And then we shared it with each other when we came back with our creations. And so you guys, artists, come on, look at this. It was a wonderful night. Look at the masterpieces. And so we all enjoyed sharing our stories about who we are and how we perceived God working with us, particularly in the early stages of his development of us. We're now moving into making a new thing, and you guys have all been appointed with another bit of clay, and what we're doing this time is we're incorporating beautiful precious stones in our work. And this, now once we bring our creations, we're not going to be able to immediately tell who made them. We won't be able to immediately ask, who are we? We will be able to ask and look and go, God is in those creations. And that's the transformation that we're doing, and that's the where we're heading. So we have given out 24 pieces of clay. It is vital that those 24 pieces come back so we can create and produce our grand finale of what God sees in us. So, those of you with clay, please get to work and bring them back. And if you can't, let someone else know, and we can produce those bricks. So the reason why I was very interested in this whole thing is because of this question, who am I? I've spent a bit of time with the story of Moses. Moses asked the question, who am I, to God. So I want to highlight that story and see the context of the question and the response from God when Moses asks, who am I? If we bring it to what we're doing, who was Moses in terms of a piece of clay or a bit of pottery or a vessel? Who did Moses see himself? If Moses was going to do our Bible class, what would he make? I have a feeling from his responses, his questions, his expressions of doubt in this conversation that Moses thought he was that. A broken vessel. Moses was there getting a grand appointment from God, and he was confused. He was thinking, God, this does not fit. What do you see in this? I am not fit for purpose. I think Moses genuinely thought that God had a completely different vision that Moses had of himself. Moses thought he was a broken piece of clay. Perhaps a little bit like Jackie's little pottery there. It broke on the way here, and Jackie admitted to everyone she feels broken. So she was able to tell her story, perhaps a similar way to Moses. But what I'm trying to say is I think Moses thought he was a broken pot of clay, and I think he was wrong about God. I think God too saw a broken piece of clay. But God saw much, much more than just a broken piece of clay. Deep within the heart of that pottery vessel, something was shining forth through the cracks. And we have this wonderful verse in Corinthians, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. That's what God could see in this broken piece of pottery that Moses had or expressed or showed. This man with no confidence, no pride. God looked at him and thought, he is perfect for this job. Moses just doesn't know it yet. I can visualize Moses' humility shining through the gaps. That's what God needed. Let's just consider then, though, who was Moses from our level? If we take this whole idea of how our names came about in the ancient sort of English culture, we would get a first name, and this next name would often be called a byword. Now, those bywords turned later into surnames. We have surnames. Our surnames are evolutions of what these bywords were. Now, you would get a first name, and the byword in ancient English culture was an occupation, or a character trait, or where you came from. All these things happened and formed a second word to your name, and you became that person. So the very first John Smith probably was John, and he worked in a blacksmith shop. And so things have evolved from that. It's not uncommon. Think about the Bible. Jesus of Nazareth, Joseph of Arimathea, Simon of Cyrene, Joseph the carpenter. I don't think this is any great new thing. This has been happening for centuries. First name and an occupation, where you come from, and that's your name. So let's think about Moses. Who was he in that sense? Moses was a Hebrew slave. Moses was an Egyptian prince, and Moses was a Midianite shepherd. And we look at that and go, wow, he is perfect for the job. If Moses was going to make a piece of pottery, he should make something like that. That's what we think he should be making. This is who you are. Shouldn't God then now say to Moses in answer to that question, who am I? Shouldn't God say, Moses, you're a Hebrew. You have blood connection to the people I'm trying to save. Moses, you're an Egyptian prince. You know Egyptian culture, the Egyptian language, and if there's anyone that can secure a meeting with the most powerful man in the world, you know how to do that. And Moses, you have been working for 40 years keeping a flock of sheep alive in the wilderness. Moses, you are perfect. That's who you are, Moses. But what did God say? What did God answer when Moses said, who am I? But I'll be with you. Now let's just pause here for a little moment. This is an astonishing statement. This is no mere human saying to you, I've got your back, mate. This is the Lord of hosts, the great creator of heaven and earth and the universe, saying to Moses, I'm with you. You're going to be okay. All is well. Astonishing, astonishing phenomenon. And as you know, and when we read the Bible, you will see this statement repeated over and over again as God approaches his people to remind them that he is with them. Let's say Moses believed that. End of conversation. Okay, God, we got this. Let's go. But it wasn't the end of the conversation, was it? Oh no. This was the first of Moses' questions, and he had more questions and more expressions of doubt. Here they are. What is your name? This is an interesting thing. We're so stoked. I'm so stoked. We're stoked that Moses asked this question, by the way, because the response was astonishing and we learn a lot from it. But why did he ask that? Moses talked about this little scenario there. Let's say I go down. Let's say I do this job. Let's say I go down and I approach the people. I don't know what to call you. What's your name? Moses is, in my opinion here, actually addressing a little problem. Even though he's not ready in his mind to go down at all. He's found a problem in his mind. We don't know who you are, so I don't know what to call you. Here's a problem. He's stalling, I think, to some degree. But also, I think Moses doesn't know God very well. And he wants to know more. If he's going to lead these people, he really does need to know God. So that's a question. I think there's a little bit of doubt in it. And God answers. But Moses also continues, as God is expressing his help and the plan ahead, Moses says, they'll not believe me. Another expression of doubt. And then Moses says, but I'm slow of speech, I can't talk. How am I going to be this spokesperson? And then finally, actually, Moses says this, send someone else. So, let's go back to see what's actually happening here. To three of those responses, questions and statements of doubt, God answers with these sayings. But I will be with you, in verse 12. In response to the question of his name, I am who I am, says God. And in response to Moses saying, I can't talk properly, God responds, go, and I will be with your mouth. All of those statements are connected. Every single one of those statements has God's name in it. Now, we know where God's name is. Obviously, it's verse 14 with all the big capitals. It's been highlighted. That's God's name. Moses asked, God responded. But do we miss the fact that God spoke his name in 2 verses before in the statement, I will be with you? Do we miss later on in the next chapter, I will be with your mouth? You see, when Moses asks God's name, and God says it, Moses will be able to go, oh, I've heard that before. You've already said that in the sentence or two just before it during our conversation. Brothers and sisters, can you believe that God, the creator of the universe, is happy and accepted that his name can fit into such a simple sentence as I will be with you? Can you believe that our creator wants to put that small word into a sentence like that? Can you believe that God wants to attach his name to you? He is attaching his name to you. The first time this statement appears is just one time before Moses, and God is attaching himself to Jacob. I will be with you. If you were looking for a statement of God's purpose, here's a different framework to consider. I will be with you. God's power and all of who he is with his people to then encourage them to glorify him. Is this not the purpose of God? To be with us? The first time, God is attaching his name to one person. The last time God says that in the Old Testament is in Zechariah, and it's a future reference, and God says this, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. At the end, God is attaching his name to a multitude of people. This indeed is God's purpose. It's a statement of purpose, and God starts with attaching his name to you, and you, and you, and you, all as individuals, until he's attached his name to his whole family. It's astonishing. It kind of blows my mind. And the interesting thing that I discovered when I was looking at this deeply is that when you look at God's name and the way he was expressing it, it doesn't really make sense that well. I am who I am makes sense. But then when later God says, when you go down there, say I am has sent you. It doesn't make sense. But it does make sense in the top line. I will be with you. And that is what his name is designed to do. It's to fit into a sentence, a simple sentence like that, attached to you. That is his name in context, how he designed it from the beginning. So I drew a conclusion from this conversation of Moses. We hear Moses asking the question, who am I? And when you look at the interaction and the feedback from God, God's repeating his name over and over again. God is saying, Moses, it doesn't matter who you are. It matters who I am, and I am with you. Moses, it doesn't matter who you are. It matters who I am, and I am with you. That's what God is saying here. What I believe is the summary of this interaction. I thought maybe we would take this one step further. We'll take this statement and explode it even more when we look more deeply at God's name, or just the understanding of what a name is. So I'll just put on the screen a few things that I've learned over the past few years about God, about name, about the Hebrew understanding of the word name. And this is the word Shem, which is the Hebrew word normally translated name. And yes, guess what? It means title. The English word for name means title. Something that is calling something that is called by something. That's a title. Yes, that is a definition in the Hebrew, but as I look through a smorgasbord of information about this tiny little word, I come across an all-encompassing definition of the Hebrew understanding of the word name. And this is it. The essential reality of who you are. That's your name in the Hebrew understanding. All of who you are is your name. And that was the all-encompassing statement that I come across that summed everything up from what I learnt. But you can break it down, and this is what I found so much when I looked at the word name. People like to break it down, and this is also very useful. In the Bible, name can be rendered reputation. Your reputation is something that is known of by other people. So it can be everything or a little thing. So by the people that are close around you, they know everything, a lot about you, therefore they know your reputation, therefore that's a lot about you. But the further and further it spreads out, the less and less information about you that exists. Often, if someone knows of you very little, it'll be a big thing. It'll be some dominant character trait that you have, or some good thing that you're good at doing, or some stupid thing that you did. And that'll travel. And that is your reputation, because that's how you're remembered or known by other people. If you start something that can end up bad, like, hey guys, look at me, everyone look at me, and then you jump in a car and try to drift it through a gateway but misjudge it and hit the strainer post, you have got everyone looking at you, and everyone will fall over laughing, and they will remember that moment, and they will remind you, and that'll be part of your reputation. Look at me, look at me. Disaster. In terms of God, his reputation. Now, of all the three things that I'm going to bring up here, God's strength and power is the one that fits under reputation the best. It's best described in the idea of the people of Jericho. Their knees were shaking at the very presence of these people of Israel because they had heard of the God that followed them and the mighty acts that they had done. They were fearful. God's reputation had preceded him. The word name can also mean character. The word name can also mean authority. So God says to Moses, I know you by name, Moses. Is God saying to Moses, I know that your name is Moses? No. Is God saying, I know that your name, Moses, is reputation? I know your reputation, Moses? Kind of. Is God saying, I know your authority, Moses? No. God is saying to Moses in that moment, I know your character. I know you by name. Mordecai wrote a new law in the name of the king. Is Mordecai writing a new law in the reputation of the king or the character of the king? No. He's writing a new law in the authority of the king. So those are three things that can be categorized under the Hebrew understanding of the word name. And here's just one more interesting thing. The verb of God's name simply means to be. or to exist. I exist. So what I wanted to do with some of this information, I wanted to then now transfer that into this statement. I will be with you. God's name is with Moses here. So therefore, what does that actually mean? God is saying to Moses, the essential reality of who I am is with you. God is saying my reputation, my mighty power, my strength is with you. God is saying my love, my patience, my long-suffering and kindness is with you, Moses. And God is saying, oh, my authority is with you too. You have my authority. And here's the one that gets me every time. God is saying to Moses, I exist with you. I exist with you. So to wrap up, who was Jesus? Do you think it mattered to Jesus who he was? I think it mattered to Jesus who God was, and God was with him. This is what he says. You've all left me alone, but I'm not alone because the Father is with me. See, Jesus is the absolute pinnacle of what it is to have God with you. He is the benchmark. He is, what we say, the example. God attached his name to Jesus. I am with you. And Jesus, what did he do? He welcomed it. He expressed it in all of his life. He loved God's name. He activated God's name. And that is why we have him saying in prayer to his Father this amazing confident statement. I have manifested your name. I have manifested. Imagine being able to say that. Jesus could say that. Why? Because God was with him and he knew it. And it influenced him to that end. So let's think about how we can apply some of that stuff we looked at before to this statement. Jesus saying, I have manifested the essential reality of who you are, God. I have manifested your reputation, your strength, your power. I have manifested your love, your mercy, your kindness and patience. God, I have manifested your authority. We know what Jesus said. The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me doing his work. In the way of character, do not hinder the children to come to me. You let the kids come to me. And reputation, in Luke 19, the people praised God for all the mighty works that they had seen in him. Oh yes, Jesus manifested God's name. And here's the big one, and here's the one I love the most. Jesus saying, I have manifested your existence. People know you. I'll say it again. People know you exist because of me. And so we look to Jesus to know if God exists. And because of all of that wonderful work that he did, because God was represented in every element of his life, God could say, in Philippians 2 highlights it beautifully, God highly exalted him and bestowed on him a name that is above every name. Jesus was granted the name, the very name that he represented. And so therefore, Jesus can say this wonderful statement at the end of Matthew, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So next time we ask, who am I? Why don't we ask, Why don't we say to ourselves, it doesn't matter who I am. It matters who Jesus is, and Jesus is with us. Thank you.